Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez surveyed the landscape of hard-working citizens across the nation and essentially labeled them too simple-minded to comprehend the complexities of the globe. She delivered this assessment directly into 3 broadcast cameras from a well-lit stage, and she meant every single syllable. What she remained blissfully unaware of, however, was that JD Vance had a single index card tucked away in his jacket pocket. On that card were her exact quotes, the very statements she presumed the public had long since dismissed and forgotten. Before the evening concluded, a pen would physically slip from her fingers on live television, and she would simply leave it lying there on the stage. This is the complete breakdown of how it all unfolded. The Atlantic Security Forum had attracted a significant media presence with 3 distinct television networks layered along the back wall of the auditorium that evening, their recording lights burning a steady crimson. Rumors had already circulated that the event coordinators had deliberately seated Ocasio-Cortez and JD Vance on this specific panel to manufacture friction. The venue was packed far beyond its maximum seating capacity, with excess attendees standing shoulder to shoulder along the flanks, where security normally maintained clear aisles. Seated quietly down in the very front row was an individual whom absolutely nobody was paying attention to. He was a man in his 30s who had made the long drive up from Ohio earlier that morning. He moved with a distinct, lingering limp, a lasting consequence to his left leg from a combat deployment in Ramadi, from which he did not return completely whole. Not a single speaker on that platform realized he wasn't present for the political maneuvering. He simply desired for one evening to occupy a room with someone who had endured the same harsh realities he had. He sat patiently with his hands folded in his lap, waiting with the disciplined patience he had acquired years prior. Keep this man in mind, because his presence will become crucial before this night is over. The panel moderator delivered her opening introductions with practiced warmth. When the opportunity arose for Ocasio-Cortez to offer her preliminary perspective on American global leadership, she grasped the microphone with her customary confidence, like an individual taking possession of something she inherently owned. She prefaced her remarks by stating she wanted to speak frankly rather than politely, flashing a thin, calculated smile. She asserted that the nation required raw honesty far more than it required courteous behavior, noting she had never been particularly well-mannered anyway. Then she directed her gaze across the stage directly at Vance. She proclaimed that she was looking at a bewildered individual who had authored a pathetic little memoir about his impoverished upbringing, leveraged that tragic narrative to secure admission to Yale University, and subsequently crowned himself an authority on a planet he had scarcely explored. She dismissed his background as a mere promotional campaign rather than a legitimate resume, comparing it to a uniform artificially stapled to his chest. A distinct murmur rippled through the auditorium, not exactly a gasp, but a noticeably chilled reaction. Yet Ocasio-Cortez pressed onward. Her subsequent statements are the most critical part because she aimed them directly at everyday citizens, the demographic that cheers for such narratives, the people who form their entire understanding of the world from a pickup truck's radio broadcast somewhere between a local church and a sporting goods store. She stated that the citizens who view international passports as a luxury reserved exclusively for other wealthier families needed to hear the harsh truth as well. She insisted the future trajectory of the country would not be dictated by longing for the past or by bitter rural grievances. She boldly proclaimed herself as the embodiment of the nation's destiny, framing Vance as a mere artifact of a bygone era disguised as a modern leader, dispatched to peddle a nostalgic illusion of a past that never truly existed. Ocasio-Cortez leaned back in her chair, visibly satisfied with her delivery. Down in the front seating area, the injured veteran from Ohio remained perfectly still, though his hands, which had been resting casually on his knees, now intertwined tightly, a physical, biological response to suppressing intense emotion. She had just broadly disparaged countless viewers tuning in from Ohio, Kentucky, and the vast interior regions that did not elect her to Washington. She delivered the insult with a grin, utterly convinced her rhetorical strike had landed perfectly. It did land, just not in the exact location she anticipated. If you have ever been labeled clueless by an individual who has never spent a solitary day enduring the reality of your daily life, please do me a favor and hit that like button immediately. Because she directed those words at you, deliberately broadcasting them on a stage into 3 cameras, and she meant every single word. Stay tuned, because she is about to discover precisely who she directed those words toward. JD Vance exhibited absolutely zero visible reaction to the disparagement. He had faced far worse disrespect in significantly more dangerous environments. The military veteran maintained the composed stillness of a man who realized a long time ago that the person generating the most noise is rarely the person winning the battle. Vance permitted her to conclude entirely. He allowed the applause she anticipated to fall completely flat, echoing weakly along one side of the hall before fading into nothingness before it could reach the other. He let the subsequent silence following her opening remarks stretch a half-second past the point of comfort and then pushed it a half-second beyond that, right up until the moderator shifted uneasily in her chair, and a few audience members in the front began questioning if he had even heard the insult at all. Finally, Vance leaned toward his own microphone. His initial action, the maneuver that signaled precisely how the remainder of the exchange would unfold, was to express his gratitude. He thanked the Congresswoman, stating he genuinely anticipated it would be the most candid remark they would hear all night. He lingered on the concept of honesty for a brief moment, turning the word over in the air. He then proposed that if they were putting his alleged cluelessness about the world on the table, they should leave it there and simultaneously determine which of them was incapable of reading a basic map. Those intimately familiar with Vance's legislative cross-examinations knew exactly what to watch for. He never swung his heaviest arguments while his opponent was braced for impact. He began with an unassuming small inquiry, testing the depth of the water with 1 foot before trusting it with his full weight. Ocasio-Cortez replied with slow, condescending confidence that she would be happy to educate him. Vance played along, noting he was a slow learner from a simple place who would surely appreciate the instruction. There were no massive binders on his lap, no banker's boxes filled with documents, no stack of theatrical props. There was only a single index card resting face down on Vance's knee that nobody had previously noticed. He did not touch it just yet. Before escalating to the primary issue, Vance casually mentioned her frequent international travels to global conferences and summits. He commended it, agreeing that a person ought to observe the world before attempting to dictate its affairs. He paused. He brought up a prominent panel she had attended in Munich that past February, with the big stage and the cameras rolling. Ocasio-Cortez immediately grew defensive, claiming she remembered that specific event being weaponized by individuals like him. Vance brushed the defense aside gently, assuring her he merely wanted to establish the basic ground-level facts so nobody could later claim she was tricked into a rhetorical corner. This is the absolute genius of his approach. He does not corner her. He politely allows her to corner herself. He validated her presence in Munich, confirming she stood up there alongside international governors and ambassadors because she rightfully sought to be taken seriously on the world stage. He offered this concession almost admiringly, much like a man praises a neighbor's beautiful garden right before informing him that the fence is constructed on the wrong side of the property line. He established that she was present in a professional capacity, not exhausted, not deceived, but entirely prepared. He even quoted her own specific word from her own post-event live stream. Unable to resist a question that heavily flattered her, Ocasio-Cortez reiterated that she was more than ready, boasting that she never walks into a room she isn't prepared for. The trap snapped shut quietly. Vance secured her admission on the official record. She wasn't ambushed, exhausted, or caught off guard. With a deceptively kind tilt of his head, he reminded her of a remarkably simple geography inquiry posed to her that evening, not a trick question, but the exact type of query suited for a 5th grade classroom map quiz. He noted that on a global broadcast in front of the world, she had confidently positioned the nation of Venezuela below the equator, entirely in the southern half of the globe. He allowed the error to hang in the silent air. He then gently corrected the record. The trouble is, Venezuela sits firmly in the northern half of the world. The capital city of Caracas is thousands of miles north of the equator line. It wasn't even a remotely close call. The first wave of laughter erupted swiftly. Every single person in that auditorium possessed a basic mental map of the globe somewhere in the back of their skull, and they instinctively knew the correct hemisphere without having to think about it, the same way a person knows the name of their own street. The amusement surged from the center of the room, and a man near the center aisle actively covered his mouth and failed to stifle his chuckles. The absolute cruelest part of the revelation, the element that made it land with such devastating force, was how remarkably small the error was. She hadn't been cornered by complex diplomatic trivia or a deep policy ambush. She had failed a fundamental map test. The exact type of map that hangs in the classrooms of the very town she had just labeled too dumb to understand the world. She had misplaced an entire country on the world stage, with cameras rolling, only to subsequently brand a military veteran sitting across from her as clueless about the globe. If that hypocrisy made you shake your head, drop a single word in the comments section right now. Just type Munich and return immediately, because AOC does not take this humiliation lying down, and her counterattack is genuinely something you must witness. Her jaw set firmly. She had been ambushed before in environments far more hostile than this one. She employed the tactic she always utilized when the rhetorical ground shifted beneath her, completely altering what the fight was actually about. Drawing her microphone an inch closer, her voice found its old, reliable strength because practiced anger was a territory where she had always felt completely safe. Ignoring Vance, she addressed the cameras directly, recognizing that the viral digital clip held significantly more value than the live audience in the room. She framed the entire incident as a systemic societal attack. A working-class woman of color, the daughter of immigrants, stands on a stage and is immediately put on trial for a single, minor slip of the tongue by a privileged man who has spent his entire adult life being handed things. Her cadence accelerated, and the familiar rhythm returned. She accused Yale of handing him a prestigious degree, publishers of handing him lucrative book deals, and a billionaire of handing him a Senate seat and subsequently the second highest office in the land. She claimed he was staging this trivial little quiz show simply because he could not stomach the sight of a woman who looked like her speaking with absolute authority about anything at all. She pointed aggressively out at the room, declaring that every powerful woman in the country recognizes this exact game. Society waits for her to make one solitary human mistake and then utilizes it to erase every single achievement she has ever accomplished. She insisted the debate was never genuinely about Venezuela. Rather, it was a systemic battle over who is permitted to be perceived as smart in America, arguing that men like him have spent 400 years deciding it isn't women like her. For a fleeting moment, give her credit for this, it was incredibly effective. The room moved emotionally with Ocasio-Cortez. It was a polished, clean punch that had landed 100 times in 100 different rooms, and the rhetorical muscle memory was completely intact. A reporter's pen started moving furiously. A young woman in the third row, who had been laughing just a second ago now, respectfully lowered her gaze to her own hands. The current of the room was fully hers, and you could physically feel the old reflex move through the hall like a weather front, the trained societal instinct to step back from the sheer size of that accusation rather than directly answer the substance underneath it. It held for about 20 seconds. It might have held even longer, but it was not Vance who broke the spell. What happened next is the part of the story that absolutely nobody saw coming, because it originated from the absolute last direction anyone anticipated. Down at the far end of the stage, another panelist leaned slowly into his microphone. He was a lifelong Democrat. He had sat silently through the entire exchange with his thick, weathered hands folded and his head bowed. When he finally spoke, it was in the flat, exhausted tone of a man who had been waiting a very long time to articulate one specific grievance. He announced his intention to say exactly one thing before returning to his quiet observation. He affirmed his dedication to the Democratic Party, noting he had voted with them more years than not. He described his authentic blue-collar upbringing in a steel town just outside of Youngstown, his father working the assembly line, his mother cleaning corporate offices at night. He looked directly at Ocasio-Cortez and stated firmly that he would not sit on this stage and allow her to continue doing that. He admonished her for wielding the term working class like an exclusive password. If you genuinely know people who earn their living with their hands, if you are one of those people, listen closely to what this man said next. He told her that she had never once bothered to ask the actual blue-collar laborers, the ones who physically turned the wrenches, what they truly needed. Instead, she claimed to speak on their behalf at exclusive fundraising galas in rooms they could never afford to stand in. He demanded she stop reaching for that demographic label simply to climb out of a rhetorical hole, asserting that some people actually live that reality and do not get the luxury of putting it on and taking it off like a costume. The trained defensive flinch completely left the room, and what replaced it was infinitely worse for AOC. It was permission. The young woman in the third row who had gone cold picked her skepticism back up, and this time she did not look away. You could feel the realization move through the hall from person to person, the quiet, collective understanding that the ideological spell that had protected Ocasio-Cortez for years was merely a spell, and it had finally been shattered out loud by exactly the kind of person it was never supposed to work against. A fellow Democrat on her own side of the political aisle telling her directly to her face that she does not represent the working people she constantly invokes, all while the Republican opponent simply sits there and lets it happen. Down in the front row, the man from Ohio shifted in his seat. He did not clap, and he did not nod, but his jaw moved, once the exact way a jaw moves when a man hears his own unvoiced life spoken out loud by a complete stranger and has to forcefully swallow the heavy weight of it. If you have ever watched somebody hide behind a demographic word they have not genuinely earned, you understand exactly what transpired on that stage. Subscribe to this channel right now, because this is the exact moment where the narrative stops being about one geographical slip and transforms into an exposure of a massive behavioral pattern. Ocasio-Cortez has been running for years. So here is exactly where we stand. AOC is called Vance clueless. Vance has caught her failing a fifth-grade map question. A Democrat from her own faction has publicly revoked her claim to the working-class word she keeps reaching for. And now, the Marine, the man she originally came to this panel to bury, has not even started his main argument. Vance allowed the silence to breathe deeply. He was incredibly skilled at utilizing silence. The Marine took a slow, deliberate sip of water and set the glass down with a small, sharp click. For 3 intensely long seconds, that solitary click was the absolute only sound in the entire hall. He admitted he would have let the entire issue go right there. He wanted everyone to hear him explicitly state that if a person mixes up a map under hot television lights, it means absolutely nothing, confessing he had done far worse himself. He humorously noted he once told a room full of political donors he had read every single word of a legislative bill that hadn't even been printed yet. A ripple of warm, friendly laughter echoed on his side of the room. He clarified he was truly not there to end a political career over a country placed in the wrong hemisphere. And then Vance's voice profoundly changed. It did not grow louder. It grew flatter, the exact way a highway goes, completely flat right before a massive drop. He reminded her that she didn't just call him clueless over simple geography. She had deemed him clueless about the world at large, the entire geopolitical landscape, war powers, and the brutal reality of what happens when diplomatic talking inevitably stops. He noted he had been exceptionally patient about the insult because he figured she would eventually walk the aggression back. But because she actively doubled down on the disrespect, he was fully prepared to discuss the real world. He finally turned the hidden index card over on his knee. He did not lift it up. He just stared at it. He noted that during that identical conference on that exact same night in Munich, somebody asked her the one question that actually genuinely matters. He let that sentence hang entirely by itself because what came next was the specific thing the entire room had been waiting for without even knowing it. They had asked her whether the United States should commit military troops to defend Taiwan if China aggressively moves to invade it, a simple yes or no question that the entire watching world desperately wanted an American leader to answer. Vance looked up, declaring he was going to read her exact response word for word. Not his interpretation, but her explicit words, ensuring she couldn't later accuse him of paraphrasing or taking her out of context. The room went completely quiet in that highly specific way. Rooms go quiet when everyone desperately wants to hear the answer, but is simultaneously a little afraid of it. He quoted her stammering, convoluted reply, a completely broken string of ums, filler words, and awkward stalls that ultimately concluded with her stating it was a very long-standing policy of the United States. Vance set the card firmly down on his knee. He emphasized that this was the answer the self-proclaimed future of the country provided to the single most dangerous geopolitical question on Earth on the exact night the entire world was listening. 5 ums, 0 definitive position. He noted she had awkwardly stalled for the better part of 20 seconds and then audaciously stated she merely hoped we'd never have to find out. Nobody in the room laughed at that revelation. That specific truth went down somewhere significantly deeper than a laugh down into the serious part of a room that actually decides things. Ocasio-Cortez reached frantically for the microphone again, moving much faster now. There was a desperate steel in her voice, but there was something frantic underneath that steel that had absolutely not been present 40 minutes prior. She accused him of promoting a grotesque distortion of a highly serious, nuanced diplomatic position regarding the absolute catastrophe of endless American warfare. She insisted she was simply being cautious, claiming that caution is not the same thing as being clueless. She stated that some leaders actually think deeply before they blindly send other people's children to die. And that specific line, send other people's children to die, that was the one line AOC absolutely should not have uttered, because she said it directly to a man who had actually been one of those deployed children. And Vance was completely done being polite about it. Vance declared they were entirely past the point of senatorial respect, and the easy warmth had vanished from his tone entirely. What replaced it was a flat, level, and incredibly cold intensity. He stated that respect was 40 minutes ago. Respect existed before she looked at the working citizens of this country who fix vehicles, frame houses, and pour concrete, and told them their pickup truck radios made them too utterly dumb to comprehend the world. The Marine's voice did not rise in volume. It dropped in register. He stated he had sat at those exact working-class kitchen tables because he was raised at one. He defended those people, asserting they understand the world perfectly fine, they just understand it the absolute hard way, which is realistically the only way that knowledge ever truly sticks. Vance let the heavy truth land. He aggressively pivoted to her accusation about sending children to die, declaring that warfare was the one solitary subject in this entire building where he was definitively not the clueless one. And here, for the very first time all evening, JD Vance's voice took on a sharp, dangerous edge with a metaphorical blade in it. He stated his credentials plainly. He went to Iraq in 2005. He was a Marine. He abruptly stopped. What Vance said next is the part of the night that the people in that hall would carry home with them and find themselves entirely unable to set down. He clarified he was not going to stand on a stage and wave his military service around to score cheap political points, because the specific men he thinks about on nights like tonight do not get the luxury of running for political office, and they certainly do not get to host live streams complaining about how a debate question was unfair. He refused to even provide their names, stating his fallen comrades were not cheap props for a political panel. The room was incredibly agonizingly still. But he promised to tell her this much, strictly because she earned it when she explicitly called him clueless about the world. He explained that when a political leader stalls and freezes for 20 seconds on whether the nation will defend a strategic ally, that hesitation isn't viewed as intellectual caution out in the field. That diplomatic hesitation carries a massive lethal weight, and somebody significantly younger than either of them is the one who ultimately has to carry it. Vance's voice went incredibly quiet, so quiet that the entire room physically leaned forward just to hear it. He stated he had personally watched young men carry that terrible weight, and he had personally helped carry one of those broken men home. Down in the front row, the forgotten man from Ohio, the one nobody on that stage knew anything about, the one who had driven up that morning with the damaged part of his leg that did not return from Ramadi, put his head down just for a brief moment. It was the exact way a man puts his head down when somebody finally says the one heavy thing he has been waiting years to hear spoken out loud. Vance demanded she understand exactly who is listening when she attempts to rebrand her 20 seconds of panicked silence as the brave, thoughtful kind of diplomacy. He noted that some citizens actively counted those agonizing seconds in a violently different room than the comfortable conference hall she was sitting in. He accused her of fatally confusing a luxurious diplomatic summit about the world for the brutal reality of the world itself, stating firmly that they were never the same room. AOC was asked the hardest geopolitical question in the world, completely froze for 20 seconds, and then subsequently declared it was the public's fault for even daring to ask it. If you have ever been aggressively blamed by somebody strictly because you noticed they were entirely wrong, please share this narrative with one person who would deeply understand it in their bones. Just one. Then come right back, because Ocasio-Cortez has exactly one more desperate swing left in her, and it is the hardest one she attempts all night. Vance picked the index card back up. What the Marine did next was no longer about one isolated night in Munich. It was about exposing a massive, undeniable pattern. The exact kind of behavioral pattern that only becomes truly visible when somebody finally holds it up directly to the light. He highlighted that after the Munich disaster, massive criticism rained down on her. And he wanted the folks watching at home to hear this part crystal clear. A significant portion of that severe criticism came directly from her own political side. Democratic strategists and her own party's foreign policy experts tore her apart. He read from the card to ensure absolute accuracy, noting one specific strategist stated she showed a complete lack of chops on international issues. He laid the card perfectly flat on the table, emphasizing it was her own people saying this, not him. Vance let the devastating reality sit. He recounted how she subsequently hosted a late-night live stream to aggressively explain herself. He reminded her of exactly what she said. She claimed the core problem wasn't her lack of understanding. She claimed the problem was that the rest of society had simply gotten too used to a reckless president who never thinks before he speaks. The Marine looked up, offering nothing but his own steady, piercing eyes. He summarized the absolute absurdity of the situation. She was asked one critical question about the world, completely failed to answer it, and her official explanation was that the question itself was our fault for expecting her to possess an answer. The room entirely broke. It wasn't a polite titter this time. It was a massive, rolling, helpless wave of laughter. The exact kind of laughter that completely takes a crowd over and absolutely refuses to give it back. The kind that heavily builds on itself, where people start laughing partly at the sheer absurdity of the thing and partly at each other laughing. The veteran in the front row with the hitch in his leg shook his head with a massive grin he could not have stopped even at gunpoint. AOC opened her mouth to aggressively answer, but Vance lifted one single hand, not a sharp motion, just enough to politely ask for the floor for one moment longer because the Marine was not quite finished with the pattern. He suggested that while they were finally being completely honest about the world, they should also be completely honest about the specific part of it she actually occupies. He accused her of treating the working class identity exactly like a theatrical coat, putting it on whenever the cameras start rolling and immediately taking it off the exact second they go dark. Now, if you have ever known a manager or a politician who constantly talks about hard work from behind a pristine desk they have never actually left, listen incredibly closely to what Vance said next. He recounted how just this past spring she stood up at a political rally and commanded the North to, using her exact words, pull up on the South, roll up on the red states like Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee, as if it was 1,860, and she was personally calling in the cavalry. Vance let the sheer absurdity of the statement breathe. He crucially noted she delivered these aggressive marching orders from safely behind a reinforced sheet of bulletproof glass. She commanded the American heartland to go out and physically fight injustice while she stood completely protected from the very people she was summoning. He noted that the working folks back home notice that hypocrisy because they have to notice everything. They simply cannot afford to buy the protective glass. A low, dark sound went through the hall significantly harder than a laugh. It was the specific sound a room makes when it collectively recognizes something deeply, undeniably true about a person's character. In the exact same season, Vance continued, his voice never climbing in volume. Financial reporting revealed she had spent better than $50,000 of her campaign money on opulent luxury hotels. $50,000 taken directly from the small dollar donors, the $10 and $20 working class people who genuinely believed her theatrical coat was real. The Marine shook his head slowly, appearing almost entirely sorrowful. He stated he wasn't the one who completely lost the plot regarding the working class. He simply never claimed to be its only authoritative voice in the room. She did. And then she proceeded to stay at incredibly nice luxury hotels on their dime, while simultaneously telling them to go physically fight in the violent streets. So he laid the entire carnage out on the table. Ocasio-Cortez put a sovereign country in the wrong hemisphere, commanded the heartland to charge into battle from safely behind bulletproof glass, squandered the rent money of her own working-class donors on luxury hotel suites, and then confidently walked onto that exact stage and called the combat Marine the clueless one. If your blood is genuinely up right now, hit that like button one more time, because what you just heard is absolutely not a slip of the tongue. It is a documented pattern. And tonight is the very first night somebody physically made Ocasio-Cortez stand completely still inside of it. AOC took the absolute beating. Give her immense credit for surviving to the end. She did not go quietly. She straightened herself in her chair, pulled the microphone incredibly close, and came back at Vance with absolutely everything she had left in her tank, and it was certainly not nothing. She angrily asked if he wanted to talk about where they actually came from. Her voice dropped incredibly low, fast, and furious, and for the very first time all night, she was genuinely, authentically moving. She detailed how she came to this political work from behind a busy bar, making cocktails and aggressively clearing dirty tables, standing on her feet for 10 agonizing hours at a stretch, all while men exactly like him were being comfortably mentored at Yale University by the exact same elite people who built the broken world he now attempts to lecture her about. Ocasio-Cortez was heavily leaning in now, and the intense heat was completely real. She claims she learned this country from the absolute floor of it, not from a published memoir about the floor, not from a lucrative Netflix streaming deal about the floor, but from the actual physical floor. She highlighted she had passed legislation that put actual money into the pockets of working families in her district, while he was merely on a stage performing a fake nostalgia for a small town he couldn't wait to escape from. She proudly stated she represented the absolute most diverse district in the entire country, and those people chose her again and again with their own two hands. She pointed a furious finger directly at Vance, demanding he not sit there in his borrowed gravity in his bought Senate seat and tell her she does not know the world. She insisted she had to deeply know it just to physically survive it, while he merely got to study it from a completely safe academic distance and call that studying wisdom. She declared there is a massive difference between physically surviving a thing and merely auditing it, claiming that specific difference is the entire story of his existence. It was a phenomenal defense. It was for a fleeting moment, genuinely powerful. Some of the intense heat actually came back into the hall entirely on her side. Ocasio-Cortez had reached desperately at the very end for the one solitary true thing she possessed, and it carried genuine weight. Vance let her completely finish. He let the entire defense land in the room. And then the practiced patience entirely went out of the Marine, and it absolutely did not come back. He stated quietly that absolutely nobody up there was reducing her life or her struggles. He said it so incredibly quietly that the entire room had to physically lean in just to catch it. He acknowledged she came up from behind a bar and built something entirely real, stating he would proudly shake her hand for that accomplishment in any random parking lot in America. But he forcefully clarified that her bartending past is absolutely not what is on trial tonight. What is on trial is remarkably simple. The Marine set the single index card down on the small table perfectly between them, face up where the television camera could easily find it. He stated that she stood on the global stage and couldn't tell the world which half of the planet a sovereign country was located in. He reminded her she couldn't answer the one critical security question every single leader on Earth absolutely has to be able to answer. And when her own political party publicly called her out on it, she arrogantly stated the entire world was wrong for daring to ask. Vance held completely steady, his voice never rising a single decibel. He delivered the final devastating blow. He stated she didn't just run out of an answer that specific night in Munich. She simply ran out of the basic humility required to admit she never actually had one. He declared that arrogance is the absolute only thing that is clueless on this stage, and it definitely isn't the Marine. 11 devastating words at the very end of it, maybe 10. And they effortlessly accomplish what 10,000 angry words never could have. Vance had not called her stupid. He had not called her a total fraud. The Marine had simply set her own disastrous night down on the table right beside her own arrogant words, and he let the two of them sit there entirely together. And there was absolutely no rhetorical clarification in the entire world that could ever pry them back apart. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez looked slowly down at the plastic pen resting in her hand. Her thumb had been completely white around it for a full, agonizing minute, and absolutely every camera in the hall had found it by now, the small, violent physical pressure of a person desperately holding on to the absolute last thing left to hold. AOC was a powerful woman who had successfully talked her way out of absolutely every room she had ever been cornered in. She had built an entire lucrative life on the absolute certainty that the next sentence out of her mouth would save her the exact same way the last sentence always had. And for the very first time on live television in front of the entire country, the next sentence simply did not come. The pen slowly turned in her tightened grip, slipped the last quarter inch right past her fingertips, and fell. It struck the hardwood of the polished stage and bounced exactly once, a small, bright plastic knock that the sensitive floor microphones immediately caught and carried out across the dead, silent hall, echoing exactly like something heavy dropped in an entirely empty church. Ocasio-Cortez did absolutely not reach down to retrieve it. She just looked at it lying there helplessly on the stage, this incredibly ordinary pen that had just massively betrayed her in front of the entire country. And then she slowly folded her hands quietly in her lap, the exact way a person folds their hands when there is absolutely nothing left in them to fight with. And she said absolutely nothing at all. The panel moderator, after a long, agonizing moment, asked incredibly gently whether the Congresswoman wished to officially respond. She absolutely did not wish to respond. That specific sound, the plastic pen echoing against the hardwood in a room so quiet, you could have easily heard a pin drop that is the exact sound of a political reputation permanently changing its entire shape on live national television. The silent man with the severe hitch in his leg drove the incredibly long way back to Ohio that exact same night. He didn't even bother to turn the truck's radio on. He just drove in silence, watching the dark, endless interstate unspooling steadily in his bright headlights. And somewhere just past the state line, with absolutely nobody around to see him do it, he started laughing entirely alone in the cab. He laughed at the distinct memory of a plastic pen bouncing helplessly on a stage, And a combat Marine who had physically been to the brutal world Ocasio-Cortez only ever flew comfortably over. He kept driving home to a quiet place some elite people on that stage thought was merely a faded memory. And JD Vance did the exact thing combat Marines always do, which is confidently leave the area without ever waiting around to be thanked. Vance slid the solitary index card quietly back into his jacket pocket, politely shook two hands, and walked straight out past the flashing cameras, desperately calling his name. He walked right past the completely empty chair where the powerful woman who lived her entire life by the microphone had finally run completely, entirely clean out of things to say. The Marine had confidently arrived with exactly one card in his pocket, and he confidently left with it still safely there. If this detailed story made you sit up even once, please hit that like button so the algorithm shows it to significantly more people who are entirely tired of being called clueless by elite individuals who have never actually lived their difficult lives. If you genuinely believe a man who physically went out to the dangerous world has significantly more standing to speak about it than a woman who only ever flew over it to attend a catered conference, subscribe to this channel right now and leave the number 20 in the comments section. Share this incredible moment with somebody who would genuinely feel it deep in their chest. Your life is absolutely not a memory, your hometown is absolutely not a punchline, and the world, it turns out, was always inevitably going to ask the hard question, whether she was genuinely ready for it or not. The absolute only people who get to call somebody clueless about the world are the exact ones who actually went out and saw it. Ocasio-Cortez flew comfortably over it. Vance physically walked through it. And on one specific stage, on one specific night, in front of absolutely everyone, the entire country finally got to watch the undeniable difference. What specific part of a politician's background do you believe truly prepares them for the harsh realities of global leadership?